Good evening. I'm so excited to see so many people. Just for curiosity's sake, how many people are League members? Nice, and nice that there's not League members. There's information at our table if you want to become a League member. And also for those that are members, I was asked to remind you to fill out your organics survey. Okay, so formally, good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis Civic Buzz. Oh, get to the mic. The League of Women Voters Minneapolis Civic Buzz. Tonight's topic is immigration policy. We're going to talk about from the very beginning and more about what's happening today. Before we begin, I'm going to let you all know that the program is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our League website, unedited, probably about Monday. And then last thing is, please save your questions for the end. We handed out some cards, mainly so that you don't forget your question by the time the time comes around. It's not that somebody else has to read it for you. You can, and into this mic, if you would, so that it will also be hearable on the recording. I don't think that's a word, hearable, but okay. So our speaker tonight is immigration attorney Kari Hong. Kari, yes, not Carrie, okay. Kari's represented more than 250 people before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and was invited by that court to serve on the Ninth Circuit Rules Committee. Her scholarship has appeared in numerous publications, and her commentary has been featured in many national outlets, including the New York Times, the LA Times, Washington Post, SCOTUS Blog, and on CNN. Kari grew up in Northfield, Minnesota, and is a graduate of Swarthmore College and Columbia Law School. She was a tenured law professor at Boston College for 10 years and is currently a Ninth Circuit attorney with the Florence Immigration and Refugee Rights Project, in a position they created for her. Kari still has family here in Minnesota, including our very own Meg Walters from Voter Services. And with that, I will turn it over to Kari Hong.
Well, thank you all for being here. I think everyone who's not in the League is a friend or family, so thank you all. It means a lot. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, so the first disclaimer, all the opinions are mine and mine alone. As my teenager wants to tell me, he wants no association with anything I think or do, so that's true for this talk here. And during this talk, I'm going to offer 7 concrete proposals. We actually have a list with a lot more actions that can be taken for the federal, the state, and the local government. And the first reform, which I will talk about shortly, is to repeal a law called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. I will explain why shortly. But as background for myself, 30 years ago, in 1994, I was a paralegal at an immigration law firm. I started in this field because I wanted to help people who were fleeing oppression, and I've continued this work as an immigration lawyer, a law professor, and currently as an Arizona nonprofit. And for 30 years, I've worked with detained people, people with criminal convictions, asylum seekers. And back then, in 1994, immigration law was fair. In 1994, every client who walked in the door was able to apply for, and if they qualified, they got status. And every client got secure status. As I will explain shortly, that all changed. Today, in my job, I witness human rights violations. I brace myself each day to learn not only what the new policies or practices that the current administration is doing to hurt my clients and immigrants. And they are doing this by locking up people who have status. They are placing them in deplorable, inhumane conditions. They are creating fast-track kangaroo courts. They're deporting people to third countries that they have no ties. They're deporting people who are part and contributing to our country, and they're illegally deporting people into danger zones. None of this started in January 2025. Rather, the legal framework for all that we are seeing today started in 1996, when Congress passed a law and President Clinton signed a law called the IRA law. In 1996 is the legal framework for everything that is happening, and so it's critical that this law be repealed. Before I talk more about this, I just want to give a quick history, or about some history of immigration law. And I'm doing this because immigration law is an area where information's what they like to say, a mile wide and an inch deep. When our nation was debating healthcare, our media helped facilitate the nuanced discussion of the Swiss model, the single-payer models, the advantages of different systems, but most Americans cannot explain how anyone gets a green card, how people become citizens, how people get asylum. This talk is an attempt to fill in that gap, because when we start with the real facts, we can get some real solutions. So my job today is to give you accurate information. I'm going to try and convince you that the current mass deportation approach is unnecessary, it's expensive, it's harmful. I'm going to try to convince you that the way our country has been talking about immigration has been misguided. And I'm going to propose realistic reforms that would provide a needed pathway to keep our neighbors with us and welcome millions more that our country needs. There is currently a very loud and powerful anti-immigration sentiment across the United States to justify all that we are seeing. As a matter of history, that is not new. Looking at the slide, does anyone have any guesses who said these sentiments? And for those who come hither are the most ignorant, stupid sort of their nation, not being used to liberty, they do not know how to make a modest use of it. Any guesses who might have said?
John Locke?
No. Before. Ben Franklin. He said this in 1750 because he wasn't happy about the swarthy, stupid Germans that were coming in, of which I'm a proud stock. But on a serious note, what you can see is that even in 1750, the same sentiment against immigrants was present there, that immigrants are foreign, they're different looking, they're different acting, they cannot assimilate, and they will destroy American values and culture. Also throughout US history, there have always been anti-immigrant and pro-immigrant sentiment. These are two cartoons from the 1870s. One on the left is calling out the hypocrisy of those who try to limit an immigration after they have already come to the United States. The cartoon on the right has the racist depictions of the Irish immigrants and the Chinese immigrants who are literally eating Uncle Sam to express the fears of how immigration hurts the United States. And so I mention that because I think the reality is the anti-immigrant sentiments will always continue. It's just a matter of who's in power and who makes the policies that our country needs. A very, very brief, almost embarrassingly brief overview of immigration law is that for the first 100 years, we had no borders. In 1790, the first citizenship law was enacted, and that gave new automatic citizenship to all people as long as they were the free white people. So slaves, freed slaves, Native Americans, and indentured servants were excluded from citizenship. But for everyone else, they were automatically citizens. Now, in 1882, Congress began its targeting of Chinese immigrants. Even though the Chinese immigrants were needed to build the railroads and the labor, there was a backlash, and there were laws created so that the immigrants would not be allowed to bring in their children or wives in the hopes that, as Mitt Romney said, that they would just self-deport. In places like Montana, there was such anti-immigrant sentiment that the local people kicked out the Chinese immigrants by burning homes and businesses. In 1870, Chinese Americans were 10% of Montana's population. Today, it's less than 0.02%. In 1924, there was an infamous immigration law written by the KKK, and our country had race-based quotas. And I put race in quotes because in the 1880s, in early 1990s, there were dozens of racial and ethnic categories that we don't even recognize today. But at Ellis Island, there was a list whether people were white Russian or large Russian or Sicilian, and those were all considered not white. The only white people were, as Benjamin Franklin mentioned, were the WASP Americans who were living here already. There were exclusions against Chinese, Japanese, Italians, Irish, Jewish, and other immigrants. And up until the 1940s, there was a law that if a white American woman married a Japanese man, she would lose her citizenship. In 1929, Congress passed the illegal entry and illegal reentry laws with the express purpose to keep out American immigrants. There's congressional legislative hearings which are fascinating because they blatantly say we want the laborers and then we want them out. In 2019, a federal district court found that these laws violated the 14th Amendment, and the defense of the government is like, sure, but they do have non-racist purposes, so can't we keep them? That's on appeal and something to watch. I mention all of this because from our history, it's very hard to boast that our family were the better immigrants, that we did it the right way when we have a history of laws that had very ugly undertones to them. As I glibly like to say, coming in the right way was oftentimes coming in the white way. And so those of us in the room who had family members who arrived in the United States before 1965, we benefited from these preferences. The modern era of immigration started in 1952. The country started to rethink immigration law as having the three pillars of family, work, and asylum. What was transformative was the 1965 law. It was celebrated as an important milestone in immigration law, and it was part of the civil rights legislation that Congress enacted. Race-based quotas were finally eliminated in 1965. And it was debate whether it was intended or not, but this law is what recreated the ethnic diversity that we have in the United States. The modern immigration system, all of this before 2025, is that, as you can see, 2/3 of Americans immigrate through family members. At most, about 20% of new immigrants are asylum seekers, and about 13% or so on any given year are based on employment. Now, contrary to Fox News, there is no invasion. There hasn't been an invasion. It doesn't happen every election year. But as you can see, with all of the fear of asylum seekers, here's the actual data from the US government showing that between 1990 and 2020, there were anywhere between 5,000 and 45,000 asylum seekers who were given status in our country. Trump shut down the border, so right now it's 0. Refugees, too, are very low in numbers. The blue line is how many refugees Congress permits to come into every year, and then that Congress has said the president can let in. The orange line is how many refugees actually come in. And as you can see, in 1980, when the law was first enacted, we had 200,000 refugees. And again, in 2020 and again in 2025, Trump said there were none. The only refugees we have right now are about 59 Afrikaners from South Africa. So that's where we're at. I also want to highlight, though, in 1980s, ironically, President Ronald Reagan is kind of he has actually been probably the most welcoming period for immigrants in my lifetime. Immigrants had many pathways to get status. He had 2 programs called Amnesty that gave amnesty to immigrants. He passed the 1980 Refugee Act. The laws were generous, and also the memorandum directed to the INS officers that if you can find a way to grant status, grant it. Overlook the technicalities, let people be here. All of this changed in 1996 under IRA. This anti-immigrant sentiment took over the policy, and this has been our policy for 30 years. It is very far-reaching, it's very draconian, and it did not pass with legislative deliberation. Rather, it passed in August 1996 as part of the Budget Reconciliation Bill, and it was Clinton's election year. He wanted to tack to the right, and he signed it in the Rose Garden the same month that he passed DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, and the welfare reform. The codified talking point was that immigrants are illegal and immigrants are criminal. His own advisors thought this law was crazy, but they wanted him to win the election, and that's what we have. I guess now it's 40 years, or 30 years. So if you look at the differences, before IRA, it was pretty easy to get status. If you married a citizen, there would be a way for you to come in. If you were here for 7 years and you could show that you were contributing to the country, you were allowed in. And so I mentioned that the Iowa superintendent who was arrested, he would have gotten a green card, but under the current system, he can't. Everyone could apply for asylum if your life was in danger. Everyone could get a work permit, everyone could get a social security number, everyone got a driver's license, and everyone had a hearing. Then IRA, these avenues to legalize ended. If you crossed the border, you couldn't get status. If you left the country, you had to be out for 10 years. Marriage was no longer a pathway if you entered by crossing the border. If you were a good person, that was no longer rewarded. Asylum, instead of asking, are you in danger? If you didn't apply within 1 year, you were barred. And also, this is significant to what we're seeing today. There was something that was created called speed deportation or expedited removal, where one officer could decide to deport someone without a lawyer, without evidence, without a fact finder, and without an appeal. So what happened? IRA did not end unlawful immigration, but it did create the 11 million people who are now permanently without status. This law took away status, it increased deportations, it locked up immigrants, and as you can see from this chart, the undocumented population jumped from 3.5 million to 12 million. I will talk about this later, but I want to emphasize that people are not illegal. But IRA is a law that created the problem that we're dealing with now. There simply is no line. There are no pathways. Individuals are not at fault, but we have a law that will not let people stay. IRA also increased the number of deportations. The chart on the left, which is 1990 to 2010, you'll notice a huge jump happened in 1996. That's the number of deportations. That's when IRA came into being. You'll also notice a second increase in 2008. That was under President Obama. On the chart on the right, you'll see the increase of deportations from 2003 to 2024. The orange is turning people away at the border. The blue is taking people out of the interior. You will notice the incredible increase in 2008 to 2015. That was President Obama. I noticed people on social media saying, well, at least he was humane. And I can tell you, I was there. He was not. Obama deported more people in his 8 years of office, 3 million people, than every other president combined. He did so by using the tools of IRA. Everyone in orange was turned away at the border. No hearing, no appeal, no evidence. 83% of those 3 million deportations happened without a lawyer, without a judge. One border officer can conduct a hearing in a matter of minutes versus taking the hours and years that would take in a regular hearing. Trump changed the rules in January so that now an ICE officer can conduct these speed deportations everywhere in the United States. That is what's different, but again, the origins were 1996. As the immigration community likes to say, Clinton created the knives, Obama sharpened them, and Trump is using them. My thesis is that all of these policies are misguided, whether by malice, whether by stupidity. Pursuing enforcement-only policies has only weakened our country. So the first reform, again, is to repeal IRA and restore the pathways so that people can have secure and lasting status. Another second reform is to invest in immigration courts and asylum officers. On the right is a copy of an existing bill that's been proposed. And also, Meg, I want to thank you, created a bunch of, there's a list of all the proposals that are in this slide that you can take with you. I want to highlight three main problems with immigration courts right now. The first is that Congress has not provided the resources that they need. There are 800 positions for immigration courts across the country. Every appeal goes to something called the Board of Immigration Appeals, or the BIA, which is in Virginia. A federal court can review the BIA. Now, a retired immigration judge called Dana Lee Marks in 2014 wrote a wonderful op-ed lamenting that immigration courts are the death penalty case in traffic court. And that is apt. Usually, between 70 and 80% of non-citizens do not have lawyers. The hearings are informal. It usually lasts 3 hours. Judges have not been given adequate support to research, prepare, or write decisions. Now, look at the funding gap from 2005 alone. We have $9.4 billion for ICE, that's the light blue, $7.3 billion for the Border Patrol, that's black, and $840 million for the immigration courts. This disparity, however, is not new. If you look at the chart again, it's 20 years from 2003 to 2004. There, the light blue is ICE, dark blue is Border Patrol, and the light green is the money that Congress gives to immigration courts. And Congress won't give money to immigration courts because if you give someone a hearing, they'll get status. The other thing that's important is that the lack of funding has resulted in historic backlogs. In the first blue graph, it's the case backlog from 2012 to 2025. In January 2017, before Trump's first term, there were 500,000 cases waiting to be heard, or 500,000. In January 2025, that number grew to 3.7 million. When I go to immigration court, the hearings are 4, 5, 6, 7 years in the future, and oftentimes people will not be allowed to have a work permit while waiting for their hearing. This is not the result of just Trump. Trump increased the wait times, no doubt, but if you look at the chart too, you can see that the increases were happening under Biden, and he did not dedicate the resources to fix it. Now, the most pressing problem with the immigration courts is that they're not independent. Some immigration judges are calling themselves imitation judges in protest. They are lawyers. They are employed by the Department of Justice. They are not judges. Federal and state judges, when you go into court, have no bosses. In immigration court, the boss of the prosecutor is the boss of the judge. Now think about it. What would it be like if you walked into court knowing that one person who is in charge of the prosecutor can pay, hire, and fire the judge? Is that fair? Now, twice in history, the president has interfered with this lack of independence. The first was under George Bush. I don't know if you remember the Monica Gooding scandal, which is so quaint, where she would only hire immigration judges if they voted Republican. In 2002, Attorney General Ashcroft fired 1/3 of the BIA members based on their grant rates. If they supported immigrants, they were fired. The denial rate went from 59% to 86%. Chairman Paul Schmidt, who was one of the people fired by Ashcroft, has been on record vocally saying that he believes that had a chilling effect, and that he believes that his colleagues changed their votes in order to save their jobs. Now again, in January 2025, Trump has weaponized the lack of independence. He fired 13 of the 28 BIA members. Every single one had been appointed by Biden. He's also fired over 100 judges. All of those have grants favoring immigrants. And Trump is using immigration judges to deprive people illegally of their hearings. This happened in May and June and July. If you remember when people showed up at their hearing, if they had been allowed to continue, they would get asylum and would have walked out with asylum. Instead, the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, moved to dismiss the cases and the judges let them. ICE was in the hallway arresting them. If ICE had not been there, they would be allowed to go home and file the asylum application, start off the process. Instead, they were deported without a hearing. Now, there's an interesting, as you can see from just 2 weeks ago, This American Life has an interview with these judges. The judges that were fired are speaking out. They said they were too afraid to speak out at the time for losing their jobs. They lost their jobs anyway, and so they're now speaking out about this. Trump is continuing to do this. Last week, there's a new memo telling judges you have to dismiss every case from Central America and Latin America so that ICE can send them back to Honduras so they can apply for asylum in Honduras. This too is illegal, but again, the judges are captured and they have to decide whether they want their job or whether they want to do justice. So I want to repost this law. This is an important law that would create finally independent for the immigration courts. A third reform that can happen is to fund immigration lawyers. Professor Ingrid Eagley and Stephen Schaefer looked at 1.2 million cases from 2007 to 2012 and found that the greatest predictor of winning was not their country, not the judge, but whether they had a lawyer. For immigrants, they were at least twice as likely to win if they had a lawyer. If they were detained, it was 5 times likely. For children, and yes, children from 6 months to 18 have to represent themselves in immigration court. The grant rate for children, any guesses? Without a lawyer? 0 to 1%. With a lawyer, 100. The charts show this, and these are numbers from Connecticut, where you can see in purple, the first chart, any case that was granted, the purple was the person who had a lawyer by year, and the orange is the people without lawyers. The flip chart is for all the denied cases. The purple is for people who had lawyers, and the orange is for people who did not. So another way to look at this, among the cases that were granted since 2008, 97.5% have had lawyers. This is significant because 70 to 80% of immigrants do not have attorneys. Gideon, I don't know if people remember that case from the 1960s that created the public defenders in criminal court. The Supreme Court beautifully and eloquently said, we need to fund public defenders because it's critical that people are not convicted, not because the government can prove their guilt, but just to make sure that they have a lawyer to make sure that they are not found guilty because they do not have the ability to prove their innocence. The immigration courts prove that theorem, how important it is to have a lawyer to make sure that people who are eligible are able to have an ability to explain to the court that they have a right to stay here. Now, for 20 years, Congress did fund some immigration lawyers. The Florence project, where I work, actually became the model of we used to provide universal representation to every child in Arizona's immigration courts. And that was funded through Congress. It was passed for 20 years in a bipartisan manner. And it saved, and the reason why children are funded is because if either children would deny their cases or their human traffickers would appear as their lawyers. So they'd either be denied or they would be released into their trafficking situation. The Congress appointed nonprofits to represent the children to ensure that they were safe. There's also, Congress would pass and give funding for those in detention, because it was cheaper if the lawyers could be in detention center, which is also something the Florence Project did, to help weed out the weak from the strong cases. For the people who are weak, the lawyers could say, you don't have a chance, let's get you out of here. For the people who had strong, said, here's the evidence, here's how you can help. And so the statistics showed year after year, taxpayer money was saved by putting money into these services. DOJ ended this. In March 2025, the funding for both of these programs ended. In July 2025, Congress, for the first time in over 20 years, did not include it in the budget bill, so it is now gone. One of the reforms, and I realize this reform was not on the sheet, is to restore these fundings. But also, more importantly, there's a call for universal representation for all immigrants. There are 2 bills that were introduced this year. One is called the SHIELD Act, which would give money to states and nonprofits to expand the existing state public defender programs for criminal defense to also include immigration defense. And there's a second law called the Fairness to Freedom Act, which would create a nationwide public defender system for immigrants. Now, this is another thing that people can do. States and cities have already started these programs. New York City, San Francisco are funding lawyers for every immigrant who's detained. Illinois and California are expanding their existing public defender programs to represent immigrants. And Oregon has created this program where they will pay the bill for every single resident in Oregon to have an immigration attorney. So there are models out there, and for all of you want to do something, you can get your local government and your state government to start funding immigration lawyers. Another thing that can be done in family court, there is a pathway to a green card for every unaccompanied minor if they are declared under family court law to be neglected or abandoned. In Massachusetts, the age is 21 for that jurisdiction. So there's enough time for anyone coming into the country to get that status. There are other states that have 16, 17, 18, so you can make sure that your state, and I didn't have a time to look at Minnesota to make sure that this is an age. Graham? Okay, so it is. So that's done.
Yeah, that's done.
Check it off the list.
Sandra Feist is a state rep in New Brighton, and she was kind of instrumental in passing that.
Excellent. When did that pass?
That was maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, then send her a thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, the other next reform is also to realize that immigrants are not criminals. They are not illegal. Immigrants are not dangerous. They are not criminals. Study after study since the 1900s have shown that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than U.S. citizens, and this is true whether they have legal status or not. I would personally like to express disappointment with politicians such as Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, who say that they're fine with helping immigrants as long as they're not the criminals. Well, and Obama's policy was literally that. His policy was, we're helping families, not felons. I think it's important that people begin critical thinking to ask why. I have a veteran who served in over 100 combat missions in Afghanistan. He has a drug conviction. He's a criminal. He was deported. I have 2 clients who were small business owners who were being deported over drug crimes. One was simple possession of marijuana that was even expunged. That still is criminal. And the statistics show that we have deported under IRA 94,000 veterans. We have deported over 500,000 people with drug crimes and 47,000 immigrants over simple possession of marijuana. I have a 67-year-old client. He opened up for Stevie Wonder. He served time for a crime that no white person would ever have been charged with. The reality is we have racial bias in the criminal justice system, so that crimes that white people commit are being charged at higher rates for black and brown people. Just by show of hands, was anyone here in college who took drugs or knew anyone who took drugs? Anyone? And those are my clients who are being deported over that. I have a client who's charged with assault with a deadly weapon. The deadly weapon was his shoe. I have a client who is charged with assaulting an officer and causing bodily injury. How did that happen? The police officer hit him so hard, he broke my client's ribs. And the prosecutor charged my client of having enough force in his broken ribs to break the hand of the officer. If people commit crimes, let the criminal justice take care of them. Why is immigration dealing with this? Let the prosecutor and the state court figure out what is the right punishment, and there's simply no reason to add deportation, especially when Congress has made minor crimes, misdemeanors, drug crimes, and other non-serious offenses as the basis for permanent exile. Before 1990, criminal court, people could ask the judge and prosecutor not to have the crime have immigration consequences. This was called the JRAD, the Judicial Recommendation Against Deportation. Under IRA, they got rid of that. So now everyone And again, before 1996, every person would have an individualized hearing where the judge could figure out who's truly dangerous and who isn't. That ended with IRA. So the problem is any crime is a basis to deport someone, no matter how minor, no matter if it's expunged, no matter if it was vacated, even if it's pardoned, it still exists under immigration law, even if there's proof of rehabilitation or contributions that the person is making. So states can do a lot more to help immigrants in the criminal law system. So to avoid these zombie convictions, so I want to make it clear that even if someone gets rid of their criminal conviction altogether in state law, it exists in immigration court. And so I have a client from Jamaica. He was a green card holder, and again, he had one crime of simple possession of marijuana. It's actually vacated under Georgia. He's out of the country. He was deported over that. The states can change this by changing all of their felonies to 364 days. That is something that 16 states did, including Utah and California. Another law that California adopted said there's a new law that any non-citizen can have a prior conviction vacated if it shows that they did not fully understand their immigration consequences, and that lack of knowledge is a federal constitutional violation. California did this, and that will let a huge population of people remain in the United States. So I also want to talk about this a little bit later, but ICE is not arresting people with crimes. It makes sense because when a crime happens, you call the state police, you call the FBI, you never call ICE. By their own statistics, this is data from ICE, 1% of everyone they arrest has a conviction for sexual assault or kidnapping or homicide. And when ICE apprehends those people, they're already in prison. They're not on the streets wandering around. And I also want to push back. If anyone with a prior murder conviction is on the streets, they were released in their 50s or 60s because they are model prisoners. They are fully safe and rehabilitated. So again, why is ICE calling these people dangerous and kicking them out of the country when their parole officer and the state courts have said they are safe? Now, DOJ also actually fired the DHS, and ICE has one subunit called the HSI, where they actually investigate cross-international crimes, syndicates, drug cartels. DOJ fired all of them. So the only people left in ICE are the people that we see on the streets today. ICE, and now everyone is supposed to be working on these deportation matters rather than the actual crimes that are harming our country. Now, by Trump in May 2015 or 2025, the FBI, DEA, EPA, and all the other federal agents were told to be working on deportation efforts rather than immigration. Not surprising, by September 2025, we aren't prosecuting drug crimes because all the prosecutors are working on deportation matters rather than real crimes. And the reality is, under Trump and Vance and many others, you will justify that the money and the time spent on deporting people is because they are criminals, because they are illegal. But when you and I exceed the speed limit, we're never an illegal driver. We pay our fine, we're forgiven, and we're back on the road. Likewise, if someone violates immigration law, it's the same. They will have a chance to get asylum or get a green card. If they qualify, crossing the border or living without status, it's not permanent. It is forgiven and it is forgotten. So that is why the term illegal immigrant is a political slur. It has no legal meaning. In criminal court, I want to emphasize there's a quote here from the Montana Supreme Court saying that immigration law is civil law. It is not a crime for an undocumented immigrant, even if they're deportable, to live in the United States. And also, the term illegal immigrant has no meaning in immigration court. The status is fluid. Just because you walk across the border, if your life is in danger in Iran, you get status. If you have a green card and you commit a drug crime, then you're deportable. As a lawyer, I never use the term illegal. I use the term pre-legal. Because once someone gets a hearing, they can walk out with status. Now, the political rhetoric, again, since IRA in 1996, has promoted the term illegal immigrant, which suggests that immigrants are dangerous or criminals when they are not. The term hides the fact that it is IRA that has made people without status and has not given them a pathway. And Trump has demonstrated this by taking away the status of over 2 million people since coming to office. And then he declares they all are illegal and more are planned. And I want to highlight that, and so here's some emphasis of taking away all of the status from the individuals. Now, finally, as a moral matter, immigrants under Martin Luther King, no human is illegal. In his letter from Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King called upon his readers to remember that Anne Frank was illegal. Under German laws, segregation was legal in the United States. So scapegoating an entire vulnerable population for harm is out of the authoritarian playbook. Listen to Trump. Everything he does relates to illegal immigrants. In his speech to the United Nations, he said all countries were going to hell because they let immigrants into their country. The government shutdown is justified because of illegal immigrants. Hannah Arendt, who's a Jewish scholar who fled Nazi Germany, asked the question, why could so many Germans look away during the Holocaust? And her answer is that Hitler and Stalin targeted immigrants and said they were criminals, which justified the concentration camps used against them. And she also said the problem is when you dehumanize a population and you say that some of people can be beasts, it means that others of us, our dear leaders, can be gods. So the term illegal immigrants let this administration take away legal status from millions of people and arrest those who have legal status. This project is not fighting crime, and it's noted by human rights attorney, this is simply about white supremacy. That is why there is no coincidence that the narrative of immigrants depends on taking out the democratic principles that all people are created equal. That is why Trump is attacking birthright citizenship, DEI, and all other measures that protect all of us as being equal and having a role in our society. This is what makes democracy unique. An attack on immigrants is an attack on democracy. The next reform is to abolish ICE. In 1996, again, IRA made immigration laws so much harder, and it was unfair, but there was still a chance. I thought IRA was the worst, and boy, was I wrong. So let's start out with who ICE is arresting. ICE is arresting people in churches, they're arresting tourists, they're arresting college students, they arrested a third grader in New Hampshire, and they're arresting family members of veterans who are seeking status. ICE is arresting and deported a Brown medical doctor and professor. They arrested a Harvard researcher, a firefighter. While he was on the fire lines of Washington State, while fighting the fire, they went and arrested him. They have arrested pastors, farm workers, tourists, and green card holders. Now we know all of this mass deportation causes economic harm. In the first Trump administration, we have data that we lost over 900,000 doctors, scientists, and engineers who were deported or turned away. Economists have said that the loss to our country is $9.1 billion from those lost professionals, and we have a 10 million job shortage. Despite knowing this fact, in 9 months, we're seeing the adverse impacts of the aggressive immigration policy. Immigration policy is hurting the large industries, which include construction, farm workers, restaurants, nursing, healthcare, and many others. Tourism alone produces $2.3 trillion to our economy. It creates 9.5 million jobs. Coal miners are 45,000 people, but our policy is protecting the coal miners and not the tourists. Immigration arrests and deportations are causing the food to rot in our fields. Canada is now taking our undocumented workers who were building our houses. Restaurants are under duress. During the campaign, Trump and Vance justified the immigration crackdown by saying they are eating the cats, they are eating the dogs. This was false. This was dehumanizing, and this was specifically targeting the Haitian community in Springfield, Ohio, who were all given status under Biden. As you can see from the slide, since Trump came into office, he took away the status of all the Haitians. The governor of Ohio and the local businesses are now lamenting the loss of workers who had been rebuilding that community, its churches, and its schools. The Haitians are moving to Canada. ICE is also an agency that is filled with a history of corruption and abuses that run to the very top. In the first Trump term, ICE would routinely lie to federal courts, and they lied to the public. In 2018, the ICE spokesman resigned while speaking to reporters because he said he was unable to continue the falsehoods promoted by the agency. While this interview was happening, ICE agencies went to his back door to intimidate him. Since 2005, the news is filled with how ICE continues to lie. In the court, the testimony of the ICE officers is contradicted by video evidence, but they shamelessly tell the judges what happened when it actually did not. In the height of irony, the agency is also filled with people themselves who are committing crimes. There are allegations that Border Patrol members are committing crimes towards immigrants, as well as committing sexual assault and physical assaults. The culture of crime goes to the top. Rodney Scott, who is in charge of the Border Patrol, is alleged to have covered up the report of one patrol officer raping another. And then he later threatened that former officer, who's Jen Budd, in 2012, but in April 2025, despite having that information, the Senate confirmed him again. Tom Homan is in charge of ICE, and last week there was a whistleblower report about how the DOJ under Trump closed its bribery investigation into him, even though he accepted $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents. ICE is arresting citizens, green card holders, without asking their status. They are subjecting tourists to violence. They're leaving children on the streets when they arrest their parents. They're beating up people, including journalists, who are reporting on their conduct. ICE is using violence, military equipment, and masks, and they are doing this to intimidate. Yesterday in Chicago, they raided a large apartment building in the morning and put zip ties on everyone, citizens and children alike. ICE is appearing to use ICE to intimidate students, researchers, tourists, and returning green holders who make any criticism of Trump. That's now a basis to turn people away from the border. And one problem for all these abuses is that ICE has never had a clear mission. It was created in 2003 after 9/11, and I have been working in immigration since 1994. You can deport people without ICE. We did it for hundreds of years without ICE. We'll do it again without ICE. ICE was created after 9/11, and they started by just investigating Muslim immigrants, and it hasn't gotten better since. Now, despite no oversight and no mission, Congress keeps giving it money. On the charts, the blue is the Border Patrol and the green is the ICE. Year after year, Congress keeps throwing money at this agency. The second chart shows that red line where it started out at $3.3 billion in 2003. It now has $28 billion, and it will have $30 billion by 2026. If you add in detention costs, it's $45 billion. To put that into perspective, this is now the highest funded federal agency, and among all the countries that spend money on the military, ICE would be number 16. So what can we do? We can call every congressional representative to ask, why does this agency exist? I personally think it should be abolished, but there's even a demand to have it defunded. Bill Kristol, who was the chief of staff under Dan Quayle, is now a part of the Abolish ICE team. Also, we can get congressional oversight and investigations into what's happening. At the state level, the first is to do what California did, which is to pass a law banning any federal or state officer from wearing a mask and not having identification. Trump says he doesn't care, he won't follow California law, but then you call the state attorney general and you call the local district attorneys and start prosecuting these agents for violating the state laws. In September 30th, 2025, a district court judge in Massachusetts, Judge William Young, issued a 161-page decision condemning ICE for arresting students for their free speech. It's worth reading, but I want to highlight what I have here is how he really criticizes the use of masks by ICE, where he said masks are associated with the KKK. Masks are not associated with a democracy. Local governments cannot bar ICE from entering their city, but they can prohibit a federal officer from carrying a gun in certain spaces. Yes, ICE can have their gun at their desk, but they can't have it at churches, hospitals, schools, parks, or any other public way. And also, this is important, ICE is now tracking everyone's location based on cell phone data on a company that Peter Thiel has founded and making a lot of money of. Now, ICE and all other state agencies can track everyone's location without getting a criminal warrant. Montana was the first state in the country in May of 2025 to ban its state police from using this cell phone data. The proposal is for all cities and states to outlaw federal and state government from using their cell phone data. And also, given that Peter Thiel's company is gathering and selling it, states can also pass laws making it a crime for any company to gather, sell, or distribute cell phone data outside of a warrant. The sixth reform that I propose is to end federal detention. Federal detention, again, is unnecessary. In 1983, we had 35 people in immigration detention in any given year. It was always after their hearings were over. Again, starting in IRA, we started locking people up. 2003, we had 7,000 people. And it was said that we need to do this because people won't show up at their hearings. Study after study shows that it is not true. In 2020, 99% of asylum seekers showed up at their court. Among other immigrants, the statistic was 97 for those without lawyers, 99% for anyone who had a lawyer. Detention is costly. This is a blurb from the ICE website. It costs $152 a day to put someone in detention. It would be $420 a day if they just have a check-in, or $0 to just let them show up, which again, between 97 and 99% do. So despite no need for detention, you again see an incredible increase across the country, both in terms of numbers and locations where these detention centers are. It usually hovered between 30 and 40,000. Today, it is at 60,000. As a reminder, as of September 21st, 71.5% of detained immigrants had no criminal record. Nonetheless, in July, Congress gave ICE even more money so it can fund up to 100,000 people in detention. $185 billion was given to ICE and the Border Patrol. That amount is just obscene. Last year, Americans paid $189 billion for out-of-cost medical costs. We could have covered everyone. It cost $58 billion for universal college tuition. Instead, we are spending this money on arrest, detention, deportation. And despite all this money, the conditions are deplorable, they're inhumane. There are reports that immigrants now have their hands shackled behind their backs while they eat, so that they have to eat their meals like dogs. We are locking up children, families, elderly, pregnant women. These people are being subject to physical abuse, sexual abuse, and preventable deaths are occurring. This has been happening for years, but again, DOJ fired all the inspectors general, so there's no longer any oversight. In the past week, in the Arizona detention centers, people are showing up with broken bones because of the ICE arrests. The preventable deaths are increasing. And so the question is, why are we continuing to do this? The answer is that the vast majority of these detention centers are privately owned. The graph shows is on the orange, 67% of these facilities are operated by two companies, the Geo Group and Core Civic. The graph on the right shows the increase of dollars that these private prisons are putting into lobbying costs. So the reform is to simply end immigration detention. We can call these representatives and ask them to visit the detention centers. The law permits surprise visits and make sure they visit every month. ICE is denying this right to them. Ask the representatives why are they voting for detention funding for these detention centers. Demand Congress to look into current practices, and thank Senator Ossoff, who in July 2025 produced a report showing 510 human rights abuses have been occurring since January alone. There's also what we can do at the state and local government. We can tax these companies. We can divest stocks from Core Civic and the GEO Group. We can create crimes for business who let physical and sexual abuse happen in their custody. We can give private rights of action for abuses so that people can sue these centers, and insurance companies will increase the policies. Now, the final reform is to communicate the value that our country actually needs more immigrants. If you go back to 1994, we were spending $400 million for the border control, and the green line here. What we need more immigrants in our country. What we have here is that immigrants contribute to the economy in numerous ways. Social Security will be depleted in 9 years unless we have young workers. Of the Venezuelans, of the 2 million Venezuelans that we just deported, 87% were of working age and were contributing to the Social Security fund. That is, those people are now gone. We also, what I want to highlight too, is that I personally became patriotic when I saw the United States through the eyes of my immigrant clients. I had a young Honduran teenager. He was brave enough to escape the gang who tried to kill him. After he won asylum, he called me, asking how he could join the U.S. Army so he could give back. I have a family from Mexico. They came to the United States and they worked 3 jobs so that all 3 children went to college. I have a Tibetan lawyer who was jailed by Chinese police for his peaceful protest. I have a Brazilian transgender woman who fled life after daily physical and sexual assaults so she could live in a country without violence and in peace. I have a family beaten by the Iranian police for worshiping the God of their choice. I have a woman running her small business until the Haitian police extorted bribes. For my clients, the United States was the only hope, where they would not be killed, where they would live, where they would worship the God of their choice or no religion at all, a place where their children would have more opportunities than what they had, a place where they can start businesses without corruption, and a place where we follow the rule of law instead of the will of the strongest. We all grew up reading Anne Frank and believing that when fascism came, we would break an immoral law and hide the targets of the Nazi police, and Trump has humbled us. We watch as billionaires, Columbia University, powerful law firms, and those who know better are too afraid to stand up for what's right. But my immigrant clients were tested too. And unlike the wealthy and the powerful in our country, they passed. They had the courage to turn down power because they would not hurt others. They had the strength and the moral clarity to fight for injustice. So my question, who has American values? And who is needed to make our country the best it can be? We used to be a safe haven from injustice, and we are now deporting people back into the jaws of poverty, violence, and death. So I hope you join me in realizing that it is time to make human rights matter once more. Just want to end with two final quotes. One was from Ronald Reagan's final speech as president. In January 1989, I encourage that you look this up. His last speech was awarding Mike Mansfield the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In the speech, he wrote as a love letter to immigrants. He invoked the Statue of Liberty as being a reminder of the compact that we have with our parents, grandparents, ancestors to accept more immigrants and more asylum seekers. He explained that immigrants are the ones who renew American values of democracy, hard work, religious freedom, family. He said, we lead the world because unique among nations, we draw our people, our strength from every country and every corner of the world. He explained that because the U.S. can attract new ideas and new people, we are able to be a nation forever young and always on the next frontier. I leave you with something in the speech that has haunted me. He also warned that if we ever closed our doors to immigrants, America's leadership in the world would be lost. I mention this because the problems we have had in the country happened at a time when we did not have immigration reform for 40 years. In the Bible, we've been 40 years in the wilderness. Our current country's decline in civil discourse and democratic norms declined when we curtailed immigration. So I hope that we can rebuild our nation and protect our democracy. And lastly, in honor of Jane Goodall, I found a quote where she explained that hope is not wishing upon a bright star, but she said hope is a verb. Hope is action that we must undertake day in and day out. And so with that, I leave you. Thanks to Meg, we have a list of actions that you can undertake from this presentation, and I hope that you start spreading the word and start undertaking action every single day. Are there questions? I covered a lot.
I do have a question, if you could come and ask it at the microphone so it will be on the recording and everyone can hear it.
Hello, I'm Patrick. I had a question about something that is very pressing to Minneapolis, and I don't expect you to know anything about Minneapolis's laws, but in the news is our separation ordinance, which keeps our police department from interacting with ICE. Just curious, asking you to shoot from the hip, so it's okay if you don't have an answer, but are there certain provisions that municipalities should be taking on to strengthen those kind of ordinances?
So I think this was a debate from 2018 when we talked about sanctuary cities, and those are the 287G agreements. Yes, we shouldn't be helping ICE. But as a practical matter, Trump has conditioned every single federal grant on cooperating, allowing these 287 agreements where ICE is allowed to be in the community, which is why I think rather than engaging, I think it's called effigy politics, right? Where it's a fight over the symbol, are you a sanctuary city or not? I think it would be much more creative if we just went back and started just saying, sure, you can be here, but you can't carry your gun in any place outside of your building. I think we need to we have to develop our tactics and be more strategic and more aggressive rather than staying in the tried debates that they will win over Twitter.
Super sobering, so thank you very much for that. You talked about asylum seekers and refugees. And my question is, what about the people that basically cross the border at non-legal or non-authorized checkpoints, and what are those groups of people, and where do they fit into that asylum seekers and refugee category? And then also, I hear conservatives say, hey, they broke the law because they crossed illegally. So yes, they've already broken the law. How do you respond to that?
So two questions. First, a refugee is someone who outside of the country has left a dangerous place, a war zone, and they have been vetted by the UN. It takes about 2 years, and they're brought into the country with legal status. They're usually paired with private organizations that help them assimilate into the country, so they arrive with status. Asylum seeker has to prove that they individually are in danger. So they have to show that Putin knows about them, that they're a political activist, and that they will be persecuted or tortured if they return to their country. So it's a much higher bar. Those are the people who are crossing the border, because you can only get asylum if you're within the United States. And there's a slide that I have that the law says it does not matter how you cross. If you are going to be persecuted or killed, we will give you protection. So the rhetoric that you've broken the law is rhetoric. The reality is, under immigration law, they have not violated any. and again, including my great grandmother from Norway. I mean, like, we are all, a lot of economic migrants are here too. I personally, after 25 years, we have a 10 million worker shortage. We need doctors. We have nurses. The UK and Canada, we already have a worldwide shortage. They are going around to the countries and recruiting those doctors and nurses. We aren't. We are pushing them away. And in fact, the H-1B program, which now has a 10,000, that's not legal, by the way, but he's saying there's a $100,000 fee. Those are doctors. The number one program that places doctors in rural communities is the H-1B program. So those are workers that our country needs, and we need it desperately. So not everyone agrees with me, but I believe that what should happen with our law hasn't changed. We haven't had immigration reform in 40 years. IRA 30 years ago passed this. We need a nimble immigration law where Congress can say we need 5,000 truckers, we need 3,000 construction workers, we need 2,000 farm workers, and be able to create the visas and the status and bring people to the surface. We're not doing that. I would like to see that reform happen.
I would like you to address the term undocumented. Non- or pre-legal citizens, as you like to refer to them, can they not have a driver's license? Is that not documentation? Can they not have a social security number? Is that not documentation? Or in the case of a veteran, can they not have a military-issued serial number? Is that not documentation?
So the question is to use the term undocumented?
Yes. Why the term undocumented to me seems to be a non sequitur.
That's why I use the term pre-legal.
Yeah.
Because
it seems to be just as politically charged as illegal.
And also, I think what your question is showing at is just simply not accurate. A veteran who has had a green card but then commits a drug crime is placed in deportation proceedings. But you can't call him undocumented because he grew up with a green card. So again, that's why these terms and the rhetoric has taken over, has substituted facts and solutions. And I think that's what our problem is.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Melissa. And it's nice to see you here. My question is, in Appleton, Minnesota, which is a small town in the southwestern part of Minnesota, the town is in talks with CoreCivic to rehab a 1,600 bed former prison into an ICE detention facility. So hopefully everybody keeps that on their radar. But I was wondering two things. One is, what do you think would be the effect on immigrants and others in Minnesota if that is to go through? And two, are there ways that you've seen that have been effective in stopping things like that, like these private partnerships with cities for mass detention centers?
So I'd like to point to one of the sources. It's Cesar Garcia Hernandez, Migrating to Prison. It's just an excellent book where he talks about the economic forces that create these detention centers, and the incentives are there for a lot of communities to be revived by these detention centers. And there are two thoughts in the immigration community. There are some people who want to boycott and prevent all of this from happening. Personally, I'd rather just tax them. I mean, they're private businesses. Tax them, take the money, and then fund immigration lawyers with that money. I mean, they're here. There's going to be a fight. They're building them. So I think it's much better to be nimble and strategic. And quite frankly, if they're not built in Minnesota, they'll be built in the South where there will be no oversight, where there'll be worse conditions. You'll have more of the alligator Alcatraz. So I'd rather have them in communities where they will be watching and protecting these people. But not everyone agrees with that.
Sounds pretty practical, though. It strikes me at this time that messaging is really critical. And you talked about the high road, which is the contributions that immigrants make to continuing democracy. The low road to me is the incredible economic impact that immigrants have. And I actually wrote a letter to the editor asking for information on the percentage of immigrants in about 5 different economic areas in Minnesota: landscaping, roofing, healthcare. And that was I didn't
Farm
get
workers.
far more, well, it goes on and on. The other thing is there was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about the contribution of immigrants to the Social Security Fund.
And that's there on the chart. It's going to be depleted without immigrants.
And that if Trump was able to deport the 12 million people he wished to deport, seniors, pay attention, it would be a devastating impact on the Social Security Fund. But that's not out there. That information is just not, I love your chart, but it's hard to find.
Well, you're here and giving out, and I think also that might be an answer to the concern over economic migrants. Those are creating, that's the Social Security for any of us who wants to retire.
Yeah.
And again, the Venezuelans, 87% of the Venezuelans who came under Biden, the 2 million Venezuelans, 87% were of working age, had jobs, and were paying into Social Security. Those people are gone.
And they won't be able to collect it.
Yes.
I mean, it's just a gift, unfortunately.
So, but I think this is why the term illegal immigrant has stopped the discussion. When we need to have more nuanced discussions, we need to talk about the facts and then come up with a whole variety of solutions that are available to
We don't
us.
seem to do that very easily, but thank you, and thank you for contributing to all of this.
Hey, Kari. So I think, I don't know who said it first, but it doesn't really matter, but that quote of "no human is illegal" was also said by Elie Wiesel.
Yes.
And it's not lost on me today, being Yom Kippur, that I'm having to mention that. So I have one question I really don't quite understand. Is what ICE is doing, pulling people out of parking lots, churches, schools, and so on, is that legal? And are people prosecuting ICE to try to stop this? Or, I mean, I just don't understand the legality of them doing this. And then I just want to add as a little anecdote. I'm part of an organization. We stand on the corner in Northfield every Thursday evening, and one of our signs is "Immigrants are our neighbors." We have had immigrants come up to us and thank us who cannot stand with us. And that has been the most touching thing for me as a white person who can do this. And we get honks, we get waves, occasionally we'll get a finger, but for the most part, it's support. And it reminds me, I think that we have to have conversations with our families, with the people who don't agree with us. We have to start talking about immigrants as people, with our neighbors, with our family members, in our churches, in our synagogues, to normalize the connections between people so that everyone is a human being.
And Jerry, I have to follow that. So, in answer to, thank you, that was eloquent. Elie Wiesel said that actually, and he said that in 1970s in solidarity with the immigrant community. When the rhetoric around illegal immigrants was coming to the fore, he would speak out at immigrant rallies to say he saw the connections in the 1970s about dehumanizing a population and where that will lead. So he's been a thought leader and a moral leader. In terms of ICE actions, whether they're legal, IRA authorizes them to be everywhere where they are. That's why the first proposal I had was to repeal IRA. The second thing, though, we have inspector generals that are supposed to have oversight. DOJ has fired every single one. We do not have the DHS inspectors general anymore. He also fired the department that used to take the grievances and the complaints in detention centers. So the office doesn't have an email, and the nonprofits are collecting this data, but the government used to collect it, and that is gone as another oversight mechanism. And the third part is this illegal, I think, and then the question is this moral. And that's why, going back to the civil rights leaders, I've been very inspired by Martin Luther King, where he said, Anne Frank was illegal, segregation was legal. We have to have more nuanced discussions in our country about what is the right thing for us to be doing as a society and as a people.
I just wanted to say that if anybody wants to ask a question but they don't want to come to the mic, Meg is available to ask your question if you just want to give her your card.
Okay, I have a question. Perhaps others have thought of this. When somebody's detained, how do they afford a lawyer? How do they get a lawyer? How do they pay for it when they can't work?
So there are, and that's why that statistic was there, that 5 times, whether you get out of detentions, whether you have a lawyer and can find one, there are people who've been living without status and they have large families and large communities who will hire a lawyer. Nonprofits were doing that work, but again, right now, and Graham can attest to this as an immigration attorney here in St. Paul, immigration lawyers, I've never been this swamped. My phone, I've turned off my notifications because I'm getting calls and emails every single day from clients, former clients, from college friends, from law school friends, from people in the community. Everyone needs help. The law firms that caved to Trump, part of their agreement was to not do immigration pro bono work. That sector is gone. I personally have been called by the Ninth Circuit, and they've lamented that they do not have placements for the pro bono work that law firms used to take because that has dried up. So there is a huge, and then also DOJ took away all the funding for children and for detention. So there have been a lot of immigration nonprofits that have been closed and are shuttered right now for lack of funding. So he was very systematic in cutting off access to lawyers. He's also then proceeded one step further, where the Department of Justice filed a bar complaint against a pro bono attorney who took an asylum case in California. So he's now trying to intimidate and scare, and it's at the California State Bar. It's not going to go anywhere. They see what it is. But there is a campaign to cut off people from lawyers. So yes, even if people have the means to hire one, as a practical matter, it's very difficult to find one right now because everyone is busier than they've ever been.
Thanks for being here. My question is personal. So my son-in-law is a green card holder from Costa Rica, dark skin. 2 of my neighbors on my block are immigrants from Iran. And I'm just wondering what we should start doing to think about protecting these folks in advance of something bad breaking locally.
So the people who can become citizens should. One thing is that asylum officers are now allowed to bring guns into the interviews. People are being arrested at citizenship interviews. They're being arrested and detained. And also there's a new citizenship test where they took off the First Amendment question. So I do think becoming a citizen is the safest protection. So those who are eligible, they should try and meet with an immigration attorney, make sure they are safe. And if so, they can apply and become a citizen now. For those who are not, everyone is vulnerable. And I think everyone's vulnerable. I think this is what happened with family separation. When Trump started that, he assumed no one would notice and no one would care. It wasn't the courts that stopped family separation. It wasn't Congress that stopped family separation. It was the loud protests of the people that stopped family separation. We still have that power. We can protest what Jerry is doing every week by protesting, by being public, by being vocal. And I think especially in this day, the polls show that this isn't popular, but we have all of these wealthy and powerful people who are caving. People need to be present and public because courage is contagious. And the more that people are silent, I think the more this will go on. And likewise, if we became loud and protested peacefully, we can put an end to a lot of this.
Thanks so much for being here. Can you clarify at the very beginning you spoke about, and I forget the term, but like agents have the ability to make a decision themselves
Yes.
on an individual's status, if
Yes.
you will, and they can make the decision that this person should be removed.
And issue a deportation
Right.
order.
So what does that look like? So if somebody is detained, are they brought to a detention center? How long are they staying there? Or are people being removed from our country within days? Just more of what that looks like.
So it started in 1996 just at the southern border and just at the ports of entry. So when anyone showed up, the Border Patrol officer was authorized to ask 4 questions. Are you afraid to return to your country? Why are you coming? And if they said that they were afraid, they would be screened in and allowed to apply for asylum. If they said that they weren't afraid, they would be issued a removal order right then and there. If they said they were afraid, they would then meet with they would be placed in automatic detention. This is what Ira did. And anywhere between 30 and 90 days, they would stay in detention until an asylum officer met with them. If the asylum officer said they had a credible fear, they would then be placed in immigration court proceedings, which could take anywhere between 1 and 10 years. If they passed that, they could ultimately leave without status or with status. If they were turned away at any point, they would be removed. Now, the U.S. Commission of Religious the Commission on Religious Freedom supervised these Border Patrol officers, and there are 3 different reports, and they issued an F because the Border Patrols would conduct these hearings in Spanish, even though they can't speak Spanish. When people said they had a fear, they would mark it incorrectly. There was a Chinese asylum seeker where the Border Patrol, instead of just saying, yes, he has a fear, he then began to challenge his credibility by saying, well, where do you go to church? The Chinese asylum seeker said, I don't go to church. He said, I don't believe you. In China, there are only state-owned churches. People have to practice in their homes. So even though that was proof of his persecution, he was turned away. So even when it was just at the border and contained, there were abuses. Bush expanded it to 100 miles of any border. And any border is 2/3 of the population. So Minneapolis is in that zone. And then Trump said there is no longer any time or distance, limitation. And that's why ICE now is empowered to issue a deportation order as soon as they interview a person.
So what does that look like if somebody receives that? Like if somebody were to receive a deportation order from an ICE?
So then they are sent in these detention centers, and if they haven't had if they've had a prior deportation order, they will be, in theory, sent on the next plane out of the country. They're sending them, if their country won't take them back, or if ICE is just lazy, they're being sent to these, South Sudan, to countries that they have no ties to. Ironically, once they are in detention, even people who don't have claims or want to leave, ICE will just let them languish. So I have clients who've been wanting and asking to leave who are stuck there for 6 months being treated to this deplorable condition. So they're kind of neglected at every single step of the way. If they do ask for a hearing, they will be in a hearing. They will have a hearing, at which point they can either get a lawyer to represent them, at which point they have a fighting chance, or they will represent themselves.
So an individual can ask for a hearing once they're in detention?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
I'd like to follow up on the question that the person asked about green card holders. I think a lot of us probably have family members, friends, coworkers, who are people of color and who are citizens. And we're reading in the papers about these people who are being caught up in these sweeps, and no matter what they say, they're just thrown in a detention center somewhere. What are your thoughts on how these people can what we can tell these people to keep themselves safe?
We can't.
Oh no, that's not the answer I wanted to hear.
ICE is picking people up on racial profiling. There was a court order, a 52-page decision from a Los Angeles district court judge who said that if someone's being targeted on their race, their last name, their language, their job, if that's racial profiling, that violates the 14th Amendment, and ICE can't do that. That went up to the Supreme Court, and on the shadow docket, they vacated it. And Justice Kavanaugh wrote the concurrence, so now people are calling it the Kavanaugh stop, where ICE now is unleashed and empowered to racially profile. And they are doing that. They are picking up citizens. In fact, they aren't even asking whether someone is a citizen or green card holder. The remedy that's available for citizens and green card holders is to sue them. And for that, they need to find a plaintiff's side attorney who are still available, who can sue ICE for those human rights violations or monetary violations.
So a step before that is, if they're detained, how do they get that opportunity to call their family, call their friends, call a lawyer or something? I mean, some of these people are kids,
ICE does not follow the law. I have been working with people who've been convicted of crimes in California, Massachusetts, and I was always impressed whenever I called the prison to speak with one of my clients. In Massachusetts, they would pick up the phone right away. There was a special line for lawyers, and they would say, under the Constitution, you have 24-hour access to your client. We'd prefer that you schedule time during business hours, but we will be available when you need to see them. In ICE, they have a line on the website. It usually doesn't work. When you call them, you're put on hold as a lawyer. You can't speak with them. They often won't speak to me, or they refuse to see my correspondence. And people are having to advocate for themselves. ICE, in February, they went door to door in the Navajo Nation, knocking on doors to arrest people, and unless they had their tribal membership, they were being picked up by ICE. So the campaign is one of intimidation. It is one of racial profiling. And the only thing is that we need to stand up for all of us to do this.
We are past 8:30. Are you good?
Kari can stay and answer questions for people.
She can.
Yeah.
If
Sure.
she's willing.
Yeah.
Okay. But we should wrap it up as far as this goes. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for coming. Thank you.
Is it democracy?
But and if you want to stay and have a chat, she's willing. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.